Welcome to the Public Voice Salon. My name is John Braden. We're a progressive dialogue on culture, politics, and the critical issues of our time. And today we're broadcasting from Judson Church in New York City, which is a church that combines spirituality with social justice and the arts. And this is a very special day here because we heard from some members of the Lakota Indian tribe, and we're just finished a discussion talking about Indian values and how we can get back to respecting the land, keeping in mind the fact that this country was stolen from the Indians by the Dutch settlers who came here. And so we just want to figure out ways that we could transform American politics. We know we have a lot of serious problems like global warming and the industrialization, which has really wreaked havoc on the environment, and this is something the Indians were always conscious of. Now we're here with Melinda. She was part of the discussion. And Melinda, what did you learn today from our discussion?
Hi, I'm Melinda Holm, and I live here in New York City. I have for a long time. I'm a world traveler. I've been around the world. I was actually born in Paris. I grew up surrounded by different cultures, so I'm used to the idea of cultural exchange and learning from one another. And also profoundly, I feel that we're all human beings and we're not that different. I mean, you might worship this way or that way, but it essentially is not that different. And when people ask me, "Oh, are you Buddhist?" or "Oh, are you Quaker?" I go, "No, but it's the same thing." So that's my profound feeling deep down inside, that we're all more alike than we are different. And I've also had the great good fortune to see some of the beautiful natural wonders of this world. You know, the redwood forest, the Rocky Mountains, the Death Valley, the deserts, the Yosemite. I'm just naming right now, but the Alps, the highlands of Tibet. I mean, really, this world is just an amazing place that we live in. And my experience is that most people are disconnected from the wonders that surround us. And I'm always thinking that the main thing as an activist that you can do is help people to feel connected and part of something, children of the earth. We're all children of the earth, and connected to one another. And not only connected to one another, but also connected to all the life forms. How are we going to live if there's no birds, no eagles, no fish, no dolphins, no wild animals? Yesterday there was a Spanish film festival, Spanish Shorts, and one guy did this great film. It was just like...
Where was that, Melinda?
Here in the neighborhood.
Okay, yeah.
And they were all short films. And one film was just like very badly exposed shots of New York City at night. And it was shot from Brooklyn. So you would see like this factory or something, and in the background the skyline of Manhattan. And then you would see like an elephant lumbering along, right? And then you would see a cheetah galloping along. And then you would see all these animals, a buffalo. And it just made me think how, we're so disconnected from that. And if we don't have them with us, our life is so impoverished. So really, my message today, if I have any, and what was reinforced by the meeting that we had today, is that there's got to be a way to reintroduce this sense of belonging, of connectedness, of all of us being in it together. And it's not only human beings, but it's all life forms on Earth.
What about the American political system? Is this addressing this, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party? What are your thoughts about that?
My thoughts about the American political system are pretty much the same as my thoughts about the American education system and the American medical system.
Okay.
You know, it's so old and it's so static and it's so stagnant that it's kind of mired in uselessness. And the only thing that keeps it kind of going is corruption. So wherever you look, be it education, be it politics, be it medicine, all the major institutions of our society seem to be kind of lost at the moment. And I'm not really sure if we need to look to the institutions to solve our problems as much as we need to look inside of ourselves and bringing up a sense of community and connectedness so we can create the kind of societies on a very small scale. It doesn't have to be big.
Okay.
Just on a very small scale, but the way we want to live, and that's really the important thing.
Thank you. Melinda, I really appreciate spending time with us. You're always welcome back as a guest on our show.
Okay.
And to let our viewers know, we're in Greenwich Village and Judson Memorial Church on the south side of Washington Square Park. And even though this neighborhood is unfortunately becoming gentrified and yuppified and all and corporatized, there are still pockets of ideas and authenticity and energy and hopefulness that you see today and embodied by the people here at this church who are really struggling for a better world. And I was very upset to see that the global warming crisis is getting worse. Scientists say that there's a lot more carbon in the atmosphere than we had expected. So I think more than ever we need to really transform our politics, transform our media. And they're not talking about this stuff on definitely not on Fox, and not even on CNBC, right? With Rachel Maddow, and they're not talking about this stuff. So we need new media.
They're not talking about this stuff, and they are not going to talk about this stuff as long as there's one guy, Rupert Murdoch, who owns TV stations, a whole network, newspapers, and the Wall Street Journal, and I forget what I read that he wants to buy next.
David H. Koch, the Koch brothers now want to buy media. They want to buy the LA Times.
Yeah,
so
that's how you control the world. You control the media, you control the message.
But this is going out. You're watching this at home. You can tell other people about this. You know, we can put this on YouTube. I have hope that we can create a transformation, and just the fact that you're on our show today and that we're having this discussion, you know.
Look, one of our elders was talking about the difference between Lakota language and our European languages. And he said something very interesting, that Lakota is verb-based. So you don't speak about the creator or the creation, you talk about the creating, which is continuously going on.
Act of creation.
And let me just tell you all, life is a river always moving, and you just can't hold on to things. Work hard.
Thank you, Melinda. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day. And we are so grateful to be here at Judson Memorial Church, a church that's very committed to making a better world, a world that's more loving and kind and caring. That's what I'm also struggling for as part of an organization that I belong to called the NSP, the Network of Spiritual Progressives, founded by Michael Lerner and Cornel West. And we are also trying to create a new bottom line, okay, because the current bottom line in our culture seeks only to maximize money and power, and we find this is very destructive, and we are really facing a major ecological crisis. We're facing a lot of depression right now in our population, and I think a lot of people are just going through the motions. They're getting up and going to jobs that they don't like. I think we need to create a different kind of economy in which we only create what we need. And these are conversations that we're not having, but today we were very grateful to hear from some Lakota Indians at Judson Church, and this is the aftermath of that very transformative conversation, and we have somebody who was part of that dialogue, and she's going to tell us a little bit about her thoughts on today's discussion about the Lakota Indian wisdom and what they have to offer.
Hi, my name is Sally Bermanzon, and I am a supporter of the Two-Row Wampum Renewal Campaign and also a member of the Native Resistance Network here in New York City. And today's program was part of a series of bringing Native American activists and leaders into Judson Church and to have dialogues with them on a number of issues, and part of actually creating understanding of indigenous wisdom, and particularly of this campaign that's going to happen this summer, where we're going to enact the way we believe that people should be relating to each other, indigenous and non-indigenous. We're going to have 2 rows of paddlers in canoes and kayaks coming down the Hudson River from Albany all the way to New York City to the UN. We're going to leave Albany on July 28th, and we're going to land in New York City on August 9th, which is the UN Day of Indigenous People.
Oh, what day is that again?
August 9th.
Okay, we have to celebrate that.
That we
Claudia,
do.
Let's do something.
Yes, well,
Yeah.
I'll give you a flyer about it and
Awesome.
a website on it.
Oh, this is terrific.
So this series has been part of that program, and it's a broad education about what we non-Indigenous people need to learn in order to survive on this planet and to be able to get along with each other and work together for peace, for with respect, and to protect Mother Earth.
And I think it's also about getting beyond capitalism also.
Absolutely.
I think capitalism has become self-destructive.
Right.
And I think socialism also has a lot to be said
Problem.
for itself.
Right.
Albert Einstein was a very intelligent man. He was a socialist.
And he also was very appreciative of indigenous wisdom.
Was he?
Yes. He spent time, I believe it was with the Hopi Hopi Nation, and so he has a great appreciation for indigenous people and their wisdom. And it is true that the whole indigenous perspective is to cooperate with each other and to realize that we are part of Earth, where everything, the land, the water, all the animals are our relations, that we're part of this. It's not like we by trying to dominate it, which is what capitalism has taught us to do, that we dominate nature and we can the whole conception of Earth is dead, and so you can dig up stuff and you can exploit the minerals and stuff. Well, that ends up hurting Earth, and right now we're learning about that in terms of the atmosphere and the water. That we need clean air and clean water to survive, and we're ruining it.
I was saying earlier during the discussion that I was having a discussion with my students up at CUNY campus up in Washington Heights, up in Inwood area, and this was around 2008 when the financial crisis had just started, and I was trying to explain to the class the craziness on Wall Street and what was going on with these derivatives, and I was having a hard time explaining it. And then I said, let's take a field trip. And we all took a walk over to this boulder, which is it's up in Inwood Hill Park, and it marks the spot where the Indians actually had the island stolen from them in 1609. They didn't think that they were selling the island. Right. They were simply giving an offer of gifts to the settlers to share, and they had no concept of land ownership. So I said to my students, this is where the financial crisis really began. Yeah. This was the first theft that actually happened. Now, you had said earlier that you were involved in the 1960s and those struggles, because I happen to think that we need to get back to that now. I think the 60s were basically put down. I think they were repressed. I think what was happening in the 60s and 70s represents a great moment in American history. Right. I think Thomas Jefferson would have loved what he saw. Jefferson said we need a revolution every 20 years, and the right wing, the conservatives, they kind of mobilized against that, and we're sort of in that reaction now, that repression. What did you do in the 60s, and do you have any hope that that kind of spirit can be revived?
Well, I was very involved in the civil rights movement in the South, and then the anti-war movement, and then the women's movement. Those were three big movements that came one after each other, and that I was really, really involved in. I felt last year when Occupy Wall Street began, that felt like the 60s.
Yes.
And I do think that there are other things. I think we have a harder, it's harder these days to communicate with each other because of the corporate media, exactly what but I think endeavors like this are wonderful.
Oh, wow.
I need to say goodbye to our speakers, but thank
you.
And,
and you're always welcome back on the show. The conversation will go on.
Great.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you. Claudia, before we leave this segment here, I want to just show over here this work of art by Klaus Oldenburg. Klaus Oldenburg is a great American artist whose original works were exhibited here at Judson Church. Also, Robert Rauschenberg originally had his works exhibited here. So there's a lot of art and aesthetics that mingle into this church. If you look at this candle, it kind of has a meaning for me that we're trying to spark a new progressive movement. We're trying to spark changes and radical changes that are needed to transform our country now before it's too late. And this church is very much a part of that, has always been, and we welcome people to learn more about this and also to see how spirituality and politics can go together, and that art is also spiritual as well. So thank you very much for joining us here, and let's keep the conversation going on. Says, resistance of the heart against business as usual. World, listen. And this is the Judson Academy for Open Thinking. What a concept, huh? There is the 10th anniversary of UAW CIO Local 600. We got to get the union movement back, folks. Look at all these union members from 1951, before the union movement was crushed in America by ultra-conservatives like Ronald Reagan. So, for the second part of our show, we're in Harlem at the Schomburg Culture Center, and this is the Malcolm X Center of the Schomburg Museum of African American Culture. And today was a very important event. They had a talk about a very historic meeting that happened back in 1960 between Fidel Castro and Malcolm X that took place here in Harlem. And these were two revolutionary leaders, and they had a sit-down to discuss strategy, and a book was written about this, and so many people in the community have gathered to celebrate this book. I see my friend Dan Fine of the Communist Party, and I want to ask Dan if he has anything to say. Dan, the last time I saw you was when I brought you into my classroom at Borough Manhattan Community College,
yes, I remember.
And you gave my students some very badly needed education about economics and about socialism and Marxism, and so you're here today at the Schomburg Art Cultural Center to talk. There was this talk. I'm explaining to the audience that there's a book about the meeting between Malcolm X and Fidel Castro that happened back in 1960, and you spoke here during the Q&A. You were very eloquent, as always. And would you like to say anything to our audience about what you're up to these days and the meaning of today's event to celebrate this?
I'm running for mayor of New York City. I'm the Socialist Workers' Party candidate for mayor. I am the only worker in the mayor's race. I'm running against bosses and billionaires, capitalists, Wall Street executives, CEOs. In other words, the Democrats, Republicans, who only represent the billionaire bosses who rule this country. In fact, it's their government, it's their country, it's their economy. We're the ones that make them rich through our wages. I'm a factory worker in New Jersey. more important than all that is that I'm running under the Socialist Workers' Party ticket, which is the only Workers' Party in the elections for mayor. Unfortunately, I'll give you credit. They've kept me out of the debates because they don't want the Socialist Workers' Party, a working class voice, in the debate. They wanted exclusively the Democrats and Republicans. That makes a really boring debate because they all agree on defending capitalism. And I thank you for the opportunity to say a few words. Our campaign is for a jobs program to put the 24 million unemployed to work immediately, building affordable housing and child care centers, other things that workers need at union scale wages. We're for eliminating stop and frisk, the police repression against the working class. We support the Cuban Revolution, demand freedom for the Cuba Five, defend a woman's right to choose abortion, which is under attack today in many state legislatures. In other words, our campaign is for working people. I was out on the picket lines when the school bus drivers were on strike, while the Democrats and Republicans are conspiring how to break the strike and eliminate this heroic fight that the bus drivers carried out to try to preserve their job security. So if you're interested in work for a living, you should check out the Socialist Workers' Party. There is an alternative to the elections this year.
I want to say how grateful I am that you came and talked to my students several times actually at Manhattan Community College. And actually now I'm teaching at Essex County College in Newark, and you're welcome to come in and talk to my students there. They need you as much as my students in New York.
Thank you for the invitation. I'll say you're our most unusual instructor because it's not often the Socialist Workers' Party doesn't get the invitations that it really deserves to speak to young people and working people, because like I mentioned, the debates are debates only for the candidates that agree among themselves, the Democrats, Republicans who represent the capitalist class. So I thank you again for the opportunity.
I'm a liberating teacher, Dan. There are a few of us out there, you know.
Yes, and I thank you for it.
And Dan, I wanted to say that a couple of years ago we had the Occupy Wall Street movement, and you had occupations all across America, and 60% of people surveyed were in favor of the Occupy movement. And since then, it seems that young people are more favorable towards socialism now than ever before. They've actually done surveys, and they found that young people are more open to the idea of socialism. So would you say that's a sign of hope?
Well, what I give more weight to than the Occupy Wall Street is what the United Mine Workers of America are doing today. What's going on in Bangladesh in light of the 1,200 who were killed. United Mine Workers has a militant history, and they've been carrying out a number of mobilizations in the Midwest. As a matter of fact, there's one this Tuesday in St. Louis I may be going to, where the Peabody, one of the biggest coal companies in the world, spun off another company called Patriot Coal, which then declared bankruptcy and told the miners they weren't going to pay them their medical or pension anymore, affecting 35,000 people. And they've been carrying out some protests and demonstrations. It's the working class that is the key to transforming and making change in this country. The miners, and in the case in Bangladesh, where over 1,200 workers died when the building collapsed, it's the same issue. The only way to prevent that in the future is to have strong unions with a safety committee that tell the boss, no, we're not going to work on unsafe conditions. Before we go back into the building, you have to repair this and repair that. The lack of such a union is what led to 1,200 sewing machine operators in Bangladesh dying when the boss told them go to work or you're fired, and they entered the building, and an hour later over 1,200 of them were dead. So we need more unions, more stronger unions. It's the working class and its struggles that is the future for a socialist movement in this country.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're giving you a mayoral candidate here on the air who is probably not going to be allowed on ABC or CBS or any of those stations, you know. And Dan, what can we do to bring the labor movement back? You know, it used to be at 35%, now it's down to something like 10%. Is there any? How can we get the labor?
There's no magic answer to that other than to support the struggles that exist today.
Okay.
And I feel the biggest reasons why the union movement is weak today is their support for the Democratic Party.
You're right. Okay. Thank you so much, Dan. Now we have a young man with us here today who spoke very eloquently here at the Malcolm X Center of the Schomburg Cultural Center in New York, in Harlem. And we're here again to celebrate this historical meeting between Malcolm X and Fidel Castro that happened in 1960. And tell us your name, sir. You spoke so eloquently when you talked about the need for education and how a lot of people out there in a society in which there's a lot of dumbing down that's going on in the educational system, they don't even know the historical meaning of Malcolm X or Fidel Castro. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and you're just an incredible speaker, and you kind of look a little bit like Malcolm yourself. I'm sure you've gotten that as well. Okay.
Well, actually, my name is David Zaire, and believe it or not, just 4 months ago, I had just completed doing 30 years in prison.
Oh my goodness!
I've just been released in January for 30 years in prison for a crime that I was actually railroaded on, and I've been trying for the longest time to get some kind of attention in the press. But when you're dealing with a system of the power and the powerless, this is what happens. What I wanted to point out today, though, was that I'm very gratified when I hear young people, usually those 30 years and younger, point out that I look like Malcolm X, that they know who Malcolm X is, and I don't get that from people who are 50 and 60 years old, the people who were around at the time when Malcolm was alive and was assassinated. But it's gratifying to know that there are people who are so young that know who he is and that his legacy still continues.
It's amazing. I think the fact that you look like Malcolm and you embody his spirit and his ideas, I think you should take the show on the road, maybe. Go around. You ever think about giving talks? Or you can always come back on our show, because we have to get this movement going. I'm very despairing about the way, the Democrats and Republicans, they're all taking donations from corporations, and we're stuck in our country now. Our politics is in a quagmire. It's frozen. And so what hopes do you have going forward that we can get this thing going again and repair and fix the problems that need to be fixed?
I think that people, particularly from where I came from, the prison system, I think that people have to know that they have a vested interest in making sure that the people that are released from prison are not released with a vengeful attitude. And they can make a difference in how those people are released if they can contribute to some of the programs and get their politicians to support the programs of education in particular, and even some programs on how people should try to develop family ties and maintain those family ties. Because once you set individuals away from education and family ties, they're coming out of those prisons angrier than they were when they went in. And they're looking to victimize people who are not necessarily always going to be in the neighborhoods they came from. These crimes are now starting to come into suburban areas, and people who usually weren't threatened by the people that are coming out now are being threatened. So they have a vested interest in making sure that some of those people come out with a positive attitude rather than a negative, and a compassionate attitude as opposed to a vengeful retaliation, because a lot of them are being abused by the correctional system, and when they come out, they're looking for vengeance on people who look like those that were prison guards.
I have a film I show my students. I teach at Essex County College in Newark. I teach writing, and there's a film about Tupac Shakur. It's a documentary called Tupac Versus, and Tupac said this whole country is run on gangs. America's run on gangs. The Democrats, Republicans, those are gangs. The correction officers, these are gangs. We have a prison industrial complex in this country. Under Bill Clinton, it was expanded exponentially. They cut all the jobs out when they exported all the jobs to China with the outsourcing. That all happened under Bill Clinton, with this NAFTA treaty and all that. And so what do you do with all these people that are out of work? You build prisons to house them. And that's what's really going on. People have to learn that. And thinking again about Malcolm X, were you always aware that you looked like Malcolm? What was the impact of Malcolm in your life?
Well, actually, Malcolm X changed my life because I became familiar with him at a time when I had gone into the military. And I went into the United States Navy, which had been some of the most racially segregated branches of the armed services, where most African Americans only used to get mess hall and food service jobs, and they couldn't be officers. And that was going on to a great extent at the time I was in there, and this was in the 70s. There was a great discrimination there, but at the time I started reading all about Malcolm X, I started having conflict with the United States Armed Forces, to the point where they wanted to transfer me to a ship that had its own Ku Klux Klan chapter. So I mean, I was very motivated by Malcolm's inspiration, and motivated not to seek retaliation through violent means, but to try to enlighten people and awaken people to the injustice so they can stand up for themselves.
David, I hope a lot of people see this program, and your words of hope are very inspiring, and I wish you all the best in going forward. You have a mission, and I think that you have a lot of power to educate with your articulation and with your message of of knowledge about Malcolm X that our young people and all people really need to heed this message. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. So I'm with Juanita McPherson, and after this event that they spoke about the meeting between Malcolm X and Fidel Castro, there was a Q&A. So there was basically an open mic, and people went up to ask things and ask questions, and I spoke and talked about the education system and how broken it is and what can we do to change that. And then after me, Juanita spoke, and she sort of followed up on my critique of the education system. And now I'm going to pass the microphone over to Juanita and tell us to reflect on what she learned from this event today and what needs to be done to get our country back on track.
Well, as far as education, the country has never been on track. You've started, like I said, inside answering your question. This country, all over the world, started the education system, I guess if you can call it that, from the Greek and Roman perspective. They were much later. As I said to you inside, if we don't start this educational system or training system from the very beginning, which is from the Abyssinia dynasty, then we got the Nubian dynasty, then we got Kemet. Our first doctors, our first lawyers, everything that's been done on this earth was done back in that time. We don't do anything new. Some of the most important people came out of the dynasty, the Kemet society. European people took that and reversed it, and that's where they get their European Jesus Christ. But what I'd like to say is this. Dr. Ben, our historian here in Harlem, he's 96 years old, he lives at a nursing home up in Co-op City. He told us that the societies were being educated in African history up until 7/11. Constantine and Constantinople had a conversation. Constantine was told to teach history from a European perspective, and that's what turned everything around. And up until that time, Jesus the Christ as we know it was African. Now he's European. That's why I don't go to anybody's church today. I wouldn't set foot in one that teaches the stuff that they teach today.
Juanita, you have such a powerful voice, and how can we get this message out there? Our young people, they're hurting. They don't know their history. They don't know their heritage.
That's why these children got their pants down around their waist and down there by their knees. They don't know who they are. They don't know that they came from King Ori, who was in the 13th dynasty. They don't know that they came out of the Solomon order. They don't know. And these schools and these powers that be are psychologically insane. Every one of them, from the Supreme Court down and from down to up to the Supreme Court, all of them, every power that be that structures our lives and take us in a direction that we don't intend to go, they're all crazy. They're all psychologically insane. I was just looking at a book over here. Well, I won't go into that. I better not go into that.
Tell me, Juanita, a little bit about your own background and how you got to be so knowledgeable.
I don't think I'm that knowledgeable. I mean, I've lived what I'm talking about. I'm from South Carolina. I was born in Rock Hill, South Carolina, 1946. And I went to an all-African school. I am an African person. Yeah. We sometimes say black, yeah. But when you think about it, black has no origin. Just like you may call yourself white. But white is an attitude as far as I'm concerned. White is a color, and I've never seen a white person before in my life. The only close person that I saw to a white person was Michael Jackson. He's the closest thing I've seen to a white person, because this is white, okay? But yeah, I was born in South Carolina to parents. My grandparents on one side were sharecroppers, and on my father's side were landowners. I grew up. I didn't know I was poor until I came to New York. But I went without clothes, shoes, food, none of that. And I was never cold. And I had plenty love on both sides of my parents. Yes.
Do you feel any hope coming out of this meeting today? I feel some kind of energy. I feel like it feels good not to be alone. Number one, that we have each other here. we can start a movement for change, for education, for dialogue. And how do we get this out beyond these rooms? And how do we get America to wake up? We're so happy that you agreed to come on our show and share some of these viewpoints.
You got to start with people like Sean Donovan, people who are in that arena, who controls the education or the training system. That's where you got to start. I mean, we can't start just by going down talking to Bloomberg, although everything that he desires is being done in the schools, because he took over the public schools, yes, and he took over the private schools, the charter schools. If he's for the private schools, the charter schools, how can you be in charge of the public schools? If they can put a charter school in a public school building, that charter school will have a new bathroom, a new cafeteria, whatever they want. And you go downstairs on the next floor where the public school is, they barely got toilet tissue. So, and he's been in charge of this. Yes. People better look at Bloomberg before he leaves, because this man is, he's turning everything around, he's privatizing everything, and he's doing stuff in perpetuity when nobody will be able to go back and change it. They better look at this man before he steps out. And if Christine Quinn wins, which she will not, good, but if there was a possibility, an inkling that she might win, he'd have a fourth term. And that's what he wants. That's what he wants. He may buy everybody off again, but she will not win because she needs the votes. She needs the black vote, and she'll never get it. She even needs the gay vote, and they don't want her.
Wow, wow.
They don't want her.
Juanita, you know, one of the things about Bloomberg that I thought was very telling, when he wanted to make a woman who was came from the publishing industry, remember Kathy Black? She had no education experience at all. He was going to make her the chancellor.
Yeah,
and so the community rose up in protest.
Exactly, and it would have stayed like that had no one said anything. This man is such a tyrant. I mean, this man should be sitting making belt buckles.
He's bad news.
Yeah,
and we have...
He should be making belt buckles. Where they make belt buckles in prison.
Well, Juanita, we're so grateful. You're so beautifully dressed, and you know, you really exemplify the spirit. And do you have conversations with other people about this? Do you talk to strangers? Do you try to engage the public in some way?
If someone engages me in a conversation, sure. Yeah. I mean, a sensible conversation. I don't want to talk fool talk with nobody.
Okay. Well, Juanita, you're always welcome to come back on our show, and thank you for sharing some time with us.
So much. Okay. All right. Good day. Thank you.
Closing thoughts on today's presentation will be from Sam Anderson, who is the president of the Board of Trustees of the Malcolm X Museum in Harlem. Sam, what are your thoughts on today's event?
I think it was a very good turnout in spite of the bad weather, and the content was very good in terms of giving people a sense of what happened in 1960 with the meeting of Malcolm and Fidel right here in Harlem, and also the whole connection to the present day realities of what's going on in Cuba, the economic and racial crisis that's existing here in New York City and in the country in general. And as usual, the audience participation was very lively, very, very informative. You know, you get a lot from that. And Sister Joan Gibbs and my wife Rosemary Mealy were, you know, good. Yeah. And I'm not being subjective when I say that. I'm being objective.
Sam, I just want to say how important the work is that you're doing here to keep alive the legacy of Malcolm X.
Yes.
We need it more than ever.
Yes.
I mean, the ecological destruction that's happening in our world now, we see hyper-capitalism on steroids.
Right.
We see it's out of control. The system is broken. Democrats and Republicans are basically, people say we need a third party. I say we need a second party.
Right.
We
we need a movement, and the movement evolves into something that's either electoral political party plus, or it evolves into some other form of revolutionary organization for the concrete demands and needs of the 21st century U.S. capitalist system. Just calling for a third party is not going to do it. I think we got to really assess the class thing, the race thing, the gender thing, the levels of gentrification all over this country, the disintegration of the suburbs and the exoburbs, all of those things take in consideration how do you build a movement, right? You don't go back to the days of Lenin. You study Lenin and you study the context in which Lenin developed the idea of a revolutionary party, and you move it towards what happens in your concrete reality. That's what Mao did. That's what the Fidel Castro, Che, and so forth, the Cuban Revolution. They studied those, but they didn't replicate them. And we have to do the same. Our challenge is a much more complex one in this country, because for the first time in history, the masses of people have been dumbed down to such a level that they don't realize that they are the masses of people with power, and so we have to, it's a re-education thing, and so that's one of the things that we're trying to do with the Malcolm X Museum is to help in small but very powerful ways the redevelopment of black revolutionary consciousness.
I just think the whole Malcolm X story, it's just so powerful, and how he educated himself in jail. It's just incredible, and how he walked these streets.
I'm sorry, but I have to.
Another time, if we can catch up with you. We're out in the rain here, but you were patient enough to talk with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sam, and keep up the good work. Okay, now is the final segment of our program where I reflect on the show from the quiet and comfort of my Hoboken apartment, and just thinking about all we did today with this incredible program that we were able to do, and do some taping at Judson Church, a place that's been very meaningful for me and very significant in my own growth as a person and as a teacher. I just want to remind the public that I am basically a teacher. I teach English at Essex County College in Newark. This is my profession. But beyond teaching in the classroom, I've taken my teaching project outside into the world through this television show. And but it's been really places like Judson Church that has educated me and helped me grow as a person, and helped me really understand the deeper linkages between spirituality and politics and also the arts. So I think all of these things sort of commingle and combine, for me. I try to create wide awake classrooms where my students can be empowered to find their voices and speak up and not be afraid and not be shy and begin to learn to think critically, because I think we're all under this mass miseducation system right now. I was taught how to teach in a very critical way. There aren't too many programs left. The program I went to was at NYU in the 1990s, and I had some very radical teachers there. By radical, I meant teachers that really go to the root of the problem in education and trying to transform and make a system that works for all. Basically, I think what a lot of people don't understand is that education historically has been a way to keep the social order intact and to keep everything flowing smoothly and not to make any changes, just to sort of keep everything in line so that the status quo can just go on with all its injustices and inequities and inequalities. And that's the kind of bad old style of education that we need to get rid of if we're going to save our country, if we're going to save our world from destruction and from imminent catastrophe that we face with ecological crisis, with the crisis in democracy today, as we see after the Citizens United decision, with the corporations completely controlling the political process now. If we're going to liberate our country, it's going to be through education, and the education will happen both inside of classrooms and outside of classrooms, like today at Judson Church, where we had two members of a Lakota Indian tribe come in and they gave the sermon in church today. And afterwards, so we were reminded that there were Native American Indians in this country that were basically had the country stolen from them, and there was a lot of violence done to these people. There was a lot of violence done to black people, and that kind of racism continues today in the prison industrial complex. So we have all of these problems in our society that are not being addressed at all by the Democrats or Republicans. So we try to give you some truth, we try to give you some education and some consciousness and some enlightenment in our program, but we urge you also to read books, we urge you to get involved. If you studied business in college, you didn't get a real education. If you studied marketing, you didn't get a real education. If you didn't study history, if you didn't learn about colonialism, then you don't know about colonialism. If you didn't learn about slavery, if you didn't learn about racism, then you don't know about these things. There's a lot of people today who don't know about Malcolm X, believe it or not, but according to one of our guests, he said that actually more young people can recognize who Malcolm X is than some of the older people in their 30s and 40s, so that's a good sign of hope. So I like to always try to bring some hope into this program, the hope that I'm sitting here on my couch and I'm able to articulate this out into the public, I think is a wonderful thing. I happen to think public access is underutilized, so I urge you all, if you have any inkling that you think you want to say some things on the air to enrich the public airwaves, I would be happy to show you how to do it. Please write to me. Please be a part of this conversation. We're trying to expand the dialogue. We want to bring more voices on the air, and it's something that is my dream, to expand the circle of democracy in America, because it's becoming more and more constricting. It's become more and more difficult in our country today. The New York Times recently reported that the rate of suicide now is up 30%. In white American males, in middle-aged males. White middle-aged males are killing themselves now. We know that the adolescents' suicide rate has already been very, very high in America, and we have a murder rate that's out of control. We have depression. We have all these problems, and we're not having any real conversation about this on the media. We're not having conversation about it amongst the political class, because they take care of the 1% who is paying their salary. So we need to get back to this 99% movement. We need to get back to people in the streets. We need to get back to mobilization, consciousness raising. Thank goodness we were able to go to this Malcolm X Center today in Harlem and learn about the legacy of this meeting between Fidel Castro and Malcolm X, two great revolutionary leaders. And again, a lot of people watching have a knee-jerk reaction to communism or socialism. They've been made to believe that these things have to be bad. They don't have to be bad. Just because Stalin was a very terrible person and he did atrocities, and doesn't mean that the idea of having a socialist country might not work. I think this is something we have to move away from, this idea of free market fundamentalism, which has been promulgated. This has really, like some sort of magical thing thinking, that if we just make markets free, well, they're not free anyway. They're being rigged in favor of the 1%. So we know that. We know, for example, Les Leopold wrote a book about this, where he talks about the fantasy finance of Wall Street now, where derivatives and that kind of thing. It's really just fantasy. It's made up stuff. It's using language to obfuscate, to control people. A lot of working people in this country, they're working longer hours if they have a job. They're taking home less money, and the top percent, the elites, are making off like bandits, and they're laughing all the way to the bank. And now you have Rupert Murdoch. He wants to control more media. Okay, I'm just going to change a little bit now. I'm going to go on a sort of a different track and just sort of calm down a little bit, because I felt myself getting a little too excited and a little too angry, and I just want to ground myself and just kind of a Zen consciousness a little bit. And take a breath, okay, and just think peaceful thoughts, and just, maybe say, go a little bit, and think of kind of myself as a Buddha. Think about some of the great Buddhist teachers like Jack Kornfield and Thich Nhat Hanh, and just, are going to change the world. It's going to happen. We're going to save our planet from destruction, and I will be a part of it, and you will be a part of it as well if you want to join me. And just thinking about it, just being able to say it, just feeling how powerful these words are to go out into the airwaves, not to just constantly complain, but also to be part of a constructive project of repair and trying to really fix the system and make it better. Something very, very powerful happened this week to me in school at Essex County College in Newark. After class, a young student stayed a little bit, and we were talking, and she told me that she felt that she's starting to write again, where before in her life, when she was younger, she liked to write, and she said it was because of the school system, and it kind of took her voice away, and she stopped writing, and she felt like that my class is bringing back some creativity in her and the ability to express things. And she said that a lot of the other classes that she has, she says she feels like the other teachers take the oxygen out of the room. And she said she feels like there's a deadness to those classes, And it made me remember what I read in Paulo Freire, where Paulo Freire, who was a philosopher of education, who taught me a lot of what I know just from reading his books, he talks about how the education system is necrophilic. The system as it is now, the traditional system, is necrophilic. In other words, it induces death. And to teach against that is to bring life. We try to bring life into the world through this show. We try to bring energy. We try to bring oxygen to you. And it's only by being able to teach in a democratic way, to be able to be an emancipatory, a liberating teacher that brings life into me, and I'm able to bring it out into the airwaves and to bring it to you. But I think it's also important for me to plug into places like Judson Church, which nourishes me, and it gives me hope just to be with other people who are doing this kind of work, and to know that I'm not alone, along with my wife Claudia, that we can work with others, we can collaborate, and realize that there are others out there that are fighting for a better world. Another powerful event that took place this week for me was I went to a meeting of the Catholic Worker. The Catholic Worker is an 80-year-old newspaper. It's one of the oldest social justice publications in the world. And they have an office on East 3rd Street in New York City. And this is a newspaper that is very, very, it's spiritual, and it's also political. It's very critical of the capitalistic system. And they had a talk Friday night. They have Friday night talks, and there was a talk about Gandhi. And somebody had gone to India, and they were very interested in Gandhi, and they covered a lot of Gandhi's tracks and kind of, went to places that Gandhi went to and brought a lot of education about Gandhi's struggle and his history. For example, did you know, this is something I just learned, that in 1931, Gandhi had a famous protest march called the Salt March, where they were protesting against the salt workers who were being persecuted, and it was a protest march that was very provocative, and it caused the state to crack down on them very brutally. but it set the wheels in motion for a revolution that eventually happened in 1947. There was a lot of things going on underground. So what that taught me was that sometimes things take time, you have to struggle. And eventually they got rid of the British. They got the British out of India, but it took a long time and it took a lot of struggling. So I think we could also bring down this oligarchy that's now dominating our planet, that's destroying our natural world. We can actually get rid of them just like Gandhi got rid of the British, So be hopeful, stay strong, and I like to also talk about the arts, so I'm going to mention a novel that I read this week called Being There by Jerry Kaczynski. And this is a wonderful book. Some of you may have read it. If you haven't, I urge you. It's a great novel. It was written in 1970, and it's about a man who rises up to high power from actually doing nothing. And he is a gardener of a very, very rich man who's an old man who's like in his 90s. And this man is the gardener. His name is Chauncey, or actually they nickname him Chance, but his name is Chauncey Gardner. And he never goes out of the house. He just spends most of his life in the garden, and for this very rich person. And he basically spends most of his time watching television. And everything he knows about life, he knows from the television. And he talks in these kind of, soundbite ways, and he talks a lot about the garden. And but eventually he winds up as like high, powerful figure, an advisor to the president, a possible vice presidential candidate, and a celebrity for being, just by saying things that don't make any sense. And it kind of reminds you of today in the media and where we're going. So thank you all for watching us. Keep watching us at the Public Voice Salon. And on behalf of my wife, Claudia, who's filming me and who I love, thank you very much.